I'm Tom Wyant. I started Killbuck Valley Mushroom 15 years ago. I was a mechanical engineer. We're in the midst of doing a production day today, which is on straw columns for various varieties of oyster mushrooms. About 4 bales does a day. That's all we need. We'll go down and chop that up fine. Things just get more busy every year, it seems. Get ready to chop. We just take these, make ourselves a little surround to catch the straw from getting blown off into the yard. I don't just chop the straw by running it through a standard square barrel chopper, but I run it through 2 or 3 times. Because the goal is to end up with a chopped straw that has basically all 1 to 4 inch length pieces in it. If you can get it down to this size, it saves a tremendous amount of labor in terms of packing it into the columns. This is all just sort of grunt labor here. It's got to cook for about half an hour to an hour. To get good and sterile and soak up all the water that it can. First dunk, the core temp goes to 140 degrees. Second dunk, about 160, and the third dunk you attain about 170. 160 to 165 is kind of your minimum pasteurization temperature that will kill most of the harmful contaminants that live in the environment and in the straw, for that matter. So we want to do a 3 dunk, which will attain a nice pasteurization temperature. Grab a cinder block here, put that on top. This is called a block and tackle. I don't like new equipment. I don't use a winch or anything. This is very old stuff. This last dunk will attain that 170 degree pasteurization temperature right through the core. And a block on top, and that'll seal the environment there and allow that to cook. First thing we're going to do is move some columns to make room for the new columns we'll be putting up today. These are the ones that I did Monday, and right beside them are the ones that are 2 weeks old. We need to clear that row to make room for the new ones we're going to be doing today. I used to just maintain a strip door between the sterile room and my fruiting rooms. I have found that taking the time to put an extra layer of plastic up and sealing it thoroughly dramatically increases my my sterility. This is what I call a fruiting room. And in the fruiting room, we take the fully run columns and we set them out to fruit or produce mushrooms. Well, you find out if you try to make a living at it, it's a fair bit of work. This is not a trivial pursuit. But that's okay, it keeps you in shape. And there's nothing wrong with doing a little work to earn your money. I've already fluffed this a little bit, so I want to get the coolest part on the bottom. We want to spread it out and fluff it. I've spread out half of a basket in my inoculation chute, and I have fluffed it once. Now I'm going to go along here and turn it all over. So while that's cooling, we've already pre-cut lengths of this is 10-inch diameter tubing, seamless 4mm polyethylene tubing. We cut off about 7 feet, tie a knot at one end, and we hook one length of that up to the end of our inoculation chute. There's a funnel at the end. Now what I'm doing here is I'm breaking up our rye grain spawn. All right, we're ready to pour here. Just trying to spread it evenly all over the top surface here. Get that rye grain spread throughout. And then I go through my little funnel here, and I just want to twist and fluff. And I'm holding the tube so it doesn't want to come loose. Take our bungee cords off there. shake down the loose straw. Now this, I will punch hole full of holes, but I won't do that until the end of the day because I don't want to increase my odds of contamination. So at this point, this will stay closed until I'm done hanging the other 9 columns. As you can see, I've already got my steel hooks that I make with a little piece of string on a loop knot so that I can slide them right on. Once I move them to the fruiting rooms, we get about, I'd say I produce most of my mushrooms off of them in about a month and a half. Back to the straw chop now. Yeah, I always leave the real fine stuff in the dust in a pile here after I'm done for the chickens to pick through. A little bit of resource recovery there. All right, well, back to work now.
I am a medical technologist by profession. So I worked several years in a hospital laboratory. Well, it sort of uses what I already know with the laboratory background, but I can set my own hours, which there's a lot of them, but not a lot of phones ringing and whatnot. So this is actually an old summer kitchen that we converted into a laboratory. And this is called mycelium. This is basically the vegetative state of the mushroom. So it's where it all starts. Now you normally don't see it because it's either under the ground or it's inside a log. So I start with a culture plate, and then I go from the culture plate to liquid fermentation. And you can see some bottles shaken. It's basically a nutritive broth that's in there, and the mycelium consumes that and grows throughout the broth. Once it's pretty much grown out, I will sterilize some rye grain and pour a little bit of the broth into each bag. You can see there's some fuzzing out in a few spots, and the idea is to get it to grow completely throughout the grain. So the pink's actually, the mycelium starts to turn pink as it matures, so that's kind of cool. How we started is I just went and bought mushrooms at the grocery store, and I got a tissue culture from one of those mushrooms. The lion's mane produce spores all over the surface. That's what all the little hairs or icicles are. Each individual hair produces spores. So if you feel them, you feel a little bit of stickiness on your finger. That's just the spores. They do better on the completely sterilized sawdust, but they will find holes if we poke holes in the plastic. So that makes it a little bit easier as far as handling is concerned. You gently touch them because they can bruise, and you just kind of twist and pull. So you can tell the maturity on these not so much by the size as by the length of the icicles. So this one is actually very small, but you can see it looks pretty furry, so it's ready to pick. I figure we do, say, between 200 and 400 pounds a week. Lion's mane we only do maybe 5 or 10 pounds a week. They're a delicate mushroom, they're unusual. There's a smaller market for them because they are unusual. It's a little harder to keep enough heat going for them to grow, but they will slowly grow with our heating process. Some can grow in the dark. The button mushrooms can, but some mushrooms are what you call phototropic, which means they don't photosynthesize like plants, but they use light as a trigger to know that it's up out of the surface and it can spread the cap and drop its spores. So the ones we grow tend to be more phototropic. If you left the lights off all the time, you'd have a very long stem, like it was trying to grow and grow and grow to try to find where the surface and the light was. The mushrooms actually breathe, and they transpire water and that's how they move nutrients to the mushroom itself. So if they stay too moist on the top, they can't transpire. And I put the smaller ones in the bottom box and the larger ones on top. In a way, the mushrooms are like my children. They need to be taken care of. You got to make sure that, the environment is well suited for them to grow. Make sure they've got sufficient humidity all the time. because if they don't, they'll get very angry. And the temperature, you want to keep the temperature high enough in the winter so they're not just sitting there dormant, that they're actually producing mushrooms. And in the summer, you don't want it to be too hot because some of the varieties actually won't fruit if the temperature gets too high. With the shiitakes, we actually completely sterilize the sawdust. So we bring it up to 14.9 psi for about 4 hours to kill anything that's in it. And then we put a little bit of the grain spawn into each bag of sawdust. Now these, it's just the wet sawdust. You really can't see anything growing. I just did those yesterday. There are ones that I did a week ago. And you can see they're really fuzzing out white, but there's still a little bit of sawdust you can see. And then they will come to completely white out. And let's see, they'll start going through a stage called popcorning, where they form a lot of bumps, and then they'll start going through a browning stage. Now here's one that's nice and brown, and at that stage, that's when we will put them in the other room for fruiting. I put them by the window to give them a little bit of a cold shock, and that'll induce them to fruit. So once I start seeing baby mushrooms, then I'll put them on the shelves. Pinning is just, it looks kind of like a pinhead, is the way they call it, pinning. And it'll continue to grow over the next several days, and it will eventually open up to expose the gills. Now, these are ones that are a nice stage for picking. You can see the gills. They're open, but it's not completely flat. You want to pick them before the mushroom completely flattens out. That's at the ideal stage. They'll fruit once, and then they'll go through a resting stage where the mycelium is just metabolizing nutrients inside the blocks. And after it's rested for about 2 weeks, then we soak it in a big soak tank. And that's to get the moisture back into it. That's a disadvantage of taking the plastic bags off because they do dry off more quickly. So put it in a soak tank of cold water, and then we put it back on the shelves for them to fruit again. So we'll pick all the mushrooms off, and then they'll rest again for a couple weeks, and then we'll soak them again. And typically we'll do that 3 or 4 times. And each time it'll be fewer and fewer mushrooms because there's not as much food and nutrition left in the block. And then by the time we go through the last flush, then we use it on the garden as mulch.
I'm usually known as Bird. That's what I do. Seeing if I can find any critters. And this is a northern 2-line salamander. And when they're out in lighter areas, they turn like a golden color. This is one that's really common. This is jewelweed, sometimes called touch-me-nots. And the reason they're called touch-me-nots is because their seeds explode. But the young leaves and the flowers are edible. And you'll only find those growing along the creek. They're about the only thing that'll grow in the gravel. Up there are some spicebush, which I really like their berries. It's kind of got a flavor like allspice. It's not like most berries that tastes like something you would put on like a steak or something. It's really good. This is probably my favorite kind of mint, like ever. If you try it, it's really, really strong. It's a little fuzzy, but it's the best. Really good. These are nettles here. Kind of fuzzy. I've kind of gotten used to how to hold them, but if you brush up against them, they'll leave little welts, kind of like a whole bunch of tiny mosquitoes. Like this jelly stuff inside. Feel it?
Okay, yeah.
And then you rub it wherever it itches.
Right there.
The 2-year parsnips are the ones that are flowering. You usually only eat the parsnips that are 1 year old. And those ones are nice and tender. The 2-year ones become woody. I'll eat those anyway. I like the buds just fried in some olive oil. They're actually kind of spicy. These are daylilies. They grow wild all over the roads, and you can fry up the flowers or the buds. I personally prefer the buds, but they're actually kind of spicy and really good. Here's a volunteer sunflower. We can come out and eat the seeds later in the year. And this here is actually one of my favorite edible plants. This is wood sorrel. It doesn't do well in the sun, so that's why the leaves are all folded up. But it's got little 3-leaf groups, and they're shaped like hearts, and kind of lemony flavor. Really, really good. Like my favorite thing to have in salads. If we were to head back there, we would find a whole bunch more edible plants. Probably the most useful of them would be the cattail. If you get them when they're just sprouting, cut them off. The white part at the base actually tastes like cucumber. Then their roots can be used to make a starchy flour, and their pollen can be used to make a much lighter flour with a certain sweetness to it. It's actually really, really good.